a conceptual structure, at least not for any length of time. And you know, being is like that. You can't encapsulate it in a conceptual structure for any length of time. No matter what you think, you're wrong. And even if you're right enough for the time being is transforming and you have to keep up with it, because otherwise the structure that you were inhabiting becomes dead and decays, and then you fall apart. And so you need a conceptual structure because it orients you, but it can't be static. And that's the problem with totalitarian ideology, is that totalitarian ideology is predicated on the idea, it's utopian, that you can finally model things once and for all. And so once you do that, it's perfect, and then it never has to change. And that's wrong technically. It's not wrong arbitrarily. It's not a kind of relative wrong. It's just wrong. And it's because whatever being is not static, and so whatever it is that you inhabit to allow being to work in your favor also can't be static, even though it has to be a structure. Then I figured out why it was a pipe. And that took about 3 years for me to figure that out. And this is a famous painting by Magritte, right? And so it says, this is not a pipe. So what does that mean? What does he mean? The first question is it a pipe? What do we think? It's actually an image of a pipe, right? Because we're projecting it. But yes, you're exactly right. It's not a pipe. And so what's Magritte trying to communicate? What's the idea? The idea is the conception is not the object. Or another way of putting it is the map is not the territory. And you live in the map in some sense, but the territory is always underneath it. And the reason that little ball turned into a pipe was to make that case. It's like it was in this box and it was being transformed into an entity that was defined and static. And it said two things. It said everything transforms, that's the chrysalis, and everything transforms into psyche, because the butterfly is psyche. And then it said, don't mistake the map for the territory, and then it left. And the being that manifests itself, the being that shines forth in the phenomenologist's sense, is the thing that cannot be encapsulated inside any conceptual structure. It's always outside of it. It's always outside of it. And you have to keep up with it. Well, and that's why in the Harry Potter book, for example, the best players don't play the game, they chase the snitch. And what that means is that they follow what manifests itself to them as most meaningful at any given time. Now, Jung would have thought of that as the manifestation of the self, because he would say, and it's like, Jung's like Binswanger. He assumes that the meaning is a consequence of the action of some internal structure, more or less, that he characterized as the self. Boss's perspective is more, in some sense, it's more like a classical religious perspective, although he dispenses almost entirely with any religious language, and makes the claim that meaning is the fundamental element of being, and that if you lose touch with meaning, then the quality of your being is going to collapse. And not only yours, but also the meaning of the society that you're part of. Because when you're updating, when you're paying attention to what's meaningful, not only are you updating yourself, not only are you improving the quality of your own being, but because you're embedded in this Mitwelt, and you're like a node in a network, your transformations affect the transformations of the people around you. And so you can't only transform yourself or fail to. If you transform yourself, you also transform society. And if you fail to transform yourself, then you also fail to transform society. And if you fail to transform society, then it stays static. And if it stays static, then it dies. And so that's the relationship between the phenomenological viewpoint and the existential viewpoint.